Hey everybody, welcome inside TCO Performance Center. Matthew Coller here, along with Dane Mizutani of the Pioneer Press, and we just finished up 4 press conferences with Kevin O'Connell, Aaron Jones, Byron Murphy Jr., and Harrison Smith. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to tell you what they said and what we think of it. It's a crazy concept, but it was actually a really fun day here at TCO Performance Center because you're talking to 3 guys who chose to come back to the Vikings and a head coach who's ready to add a new football player or 4 or more than 4 to his team, which, you know, I'm sure that Kevin O'Connell's excited to do that. So why don't we start out with the takeaways from Kevin O'Connell? And since I have all of my notes on my phone, I'm going to read them off my phone. Let us begin with J.J. McCarthy and what Kevin O'Connell had to say about McCarthy. The biggest thing that stands out is, I guess I would say, the news item, and that is that he will have no limitations going into the offseason program. So what else stood out to you about what Kevin O'Connell said about J.J. McCarthy?
Yeah, I think that's obviously like the headline is that no limitations for J.J. McCarthy. That's great. But the thing that I think stood out is the way he kind of talked about how he's approached his rehab, specifically with the amount he is throwing in that rehab. I think, and I won't be able to give the quote verbatim, but it was essentially whenever they get back on the field, the Vikings, J.J. McCarthy might not throw in one practice or one workout session as many passes as he's throwing regularly during his rehab sessions, which is great. That means his arm is ready. He's kind of ready to, I think Kevin O'Connell phrased it, to hit the ground running. And then when you couple that in with the fact that now he has no limitations, he should be able to just kind of take what he had last year and apply it to this year and kind of start to move this path forward. I know he's not QB1 technically. I don't know when we're ever going to hear, is he QB1? Yes. I'm not sure that comes in training camp. That might not come till week 1. But effectively, he is the number 1 quarterback on the depth chart. Effectively, he's the guy, especially because the only other quarterback on the roster is Brett Rippon right now. And I know we love to praise Brett Rippon, but he's not beating J.J. McCarthy out for the job. So when you take everything that kind of has been his rehab, the way he's applied himself to it, the way he's really dug in, and now you hear Kevin O'Connell say he's throwing this many times, we like where he's at there. He made it clear that he has not seen him throw because technically right now you're not allowed to. And I think every time we talk to Kevin O'Connell about J.J. McCarthy, he's like, yeah, he looks good. Well, he looks good from what I've heard. I haven't seen him throw. But in all seriousness, I think it is a good thing that he's throwing a lot, and it had to be asked, but he is not going to have any limitations. J.J. McCarthy told Kay Adams a couple months ago, maybe a month ago at the golf tournament in Mexico that he's 100%. He's 100%. That's what we have to go off of right now. And the workouts are starting. He's in the building. We're in phase 1. I think Kevin O'Connell told us at the owners' meetings that phase 1 is going to be almost like, hey, we got to dial you back, JJ. You're not throwing a million passes right off the bat. But he's ready to go, and that's a good thing for the Vikings.
It most certainly is, and it really represents also the major difference between what he dealt with last year versus this year, because at this time last year, he was waiting to have his name called, and he didn't know what franchise he was going to play for. And, of course, you know, O'Connell may have snuck him a Microsoft Surface or whatever they're using that has the Vikings playbook on it, but that's not the same as getting to start the offseason program from day 1. And that's why when we say, well, he's essentially a rookie, but not really at all, because he's been in this building working specifically toward what the concepts are. And I have some version of the quote that I wrote down, which is the types of throws. He talked about him working through his rehab. And as you said, he would never check the security tapes or maybe walk down and look over and see what he looks like. Never. So I'm not saying he violated any rules, but he said the types of throws that O'Connell has heard that he is doing is the ones that are required for the offense, the rhythm, the timing, the velocity. And so he's been back working out since January. That's a lot of, I'll use a Kirk Cousins phrase, that's a lot of time on task, alone in the building. And that's what has really impressed all of us, Dane, since day one. I don't know how many times I've brought it up, but last year, he didn't go anywhere when it came to that time where guys usually go on vacation. And O'Connell was asked about, well, is there ever a time you tell him to dial it back? And he's like, well, he went golfing for that NFLPA event, but pretty much he's just here doing football all the time. And being a quarterback in the NFL is 365. It is not a position where you could just sort of take it easy sometimes and turn it on when you feel like it. It is, you are the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. It is your identity. And I think that he really has taken that to heart. And even something Harrison Smith said about him, he said that he's enjoyed being around him, but he doesn't act his age. And that's been something else that we've identified on him from early on, is that he doesn't act like he's a 22-year-old. He acts like he's a veteran quarterback for his work ethic and how he approaches it. And I think Kevin O'Connell just sort of confirmed that in his working out, getting ready for the offseason phase, he has really implemented the key parts of the Kevin O'Connell offense that he already knew and already has a feel for and is getting those back. So I don't have crazy expectations for what we're going to see in OTAs. I know it's going to be a huge podcast we're going to do in here, and everyone's going to want to know, how's JJ look? I assume there's some rust to shake off, but he's had now, what is this, 5 months to work at it and be ready for the offseason phase to take over as QB1.
Yeah, and while it's going to definitely be overstated by us on this pod, by whoever writes about it, his first practice or his first workout, we're going to take a lot of stock into that. And truthfully, we probably have to pump the brakes and realize this is kind of a very small slice of the pie compared to where they're going to be in July. I'm pumped for it because I really want to just get to a point where we can talk about what we're seeing out of J.J. McCarthy on the field. Because right now, it's really just kind of existed in the abstract. It's like, remember that preseason game in August 2024? Remember how, he spoke to us at his locker in September 2024? That's the last time we talked to him, was in front of his locker when he was on a little scooter. Like, he's bopped around the facility at times. You've seen him in passing. You've seen him interact with his teammates. But I'm just excited to go out there and see him throw a football with the backdrop and understanding that what it looks like in April and May is not what it's going to look like in July, August, and September during week one. All that being said, though, like, this is a big moment, a big step forward in not only his quarterback journey, but just what is like this entire, encapsulation of the rehab process. He seems to be at the end of it. He's at 100%. He has no limitations. But let's see him throw a football. Let's see like the actual physical turning of the page when he lets that ball rip, and we all remember, there's a reason he went number 10 in the draft. There is a reason people thought he was going to challenge Sam Darnold for the job week one of last season. Like, all of those things, I think we kind of deep down know based on seeing it last summer. But I'm excited to kind of feel those things again come workouts here in a couple of weeks, a few weeks from now.
I was trying to remember what the quote was about the backup quarterback situation, but since I don't really care, my brain must have shut down when that question was asked.
They're going to add somebody, right? Like, that's it. That's basically it.
That's really the takeaway. It was just like, okay, you guys are probably talking about this too much, and that has been my opinion as well. I just didn't know if anything stuck out to you about what he said because I cared about it so little I didn't even write it down. They have an idea of what they're going to do. They don't want to tell us now. Do we all agree with that?
Yeah, I think effectively today, Kevin O'Connell was just like, we're going to add a quarterback, and we have a plan, and our plan is going to come to fruition at some point. Please stop talking about the comp pick formula. They're going to add a quarterback. It's not just going to be J.J. McCarthy, Brett Rippon, and whoever they add. I remember we talked at the Combine, and I was like, whoever they add is going to be really important. And you were like, no, it's not. It doesn't really matter who they add. It's J.J. McCarthy's job. That's true. If they really cared, they would have, the difference between a Joe Flacco and a Ryan Tannehill and maybe a Sam Howell, they would have gone out and striked and found their guy. It doesn't matter. And I know it's a fun talking point, but that's why it slipped your brain. It's why I don't really remember the quote either. It's J.J. McCarthy's team. They are going to sign a quarterback. Let's move on.
Look, guys, I am just about at the age where I'm starting to notice that hairline fading a little bit. So if you're struggling with the same problem, allow me to make a suggestion. Give Hims a try. Try Hims Hair Loss Solutions, and you'll be joining the hundreds of thousands of subscribers who found their hair again. Hims provides you with a convenient, quality access to a range of hair loss treatments that work, all from the comfort of your couch. Just answer a few questions, and a medical provider will determine if treatment is right for you. And if prescribed, your treatment is sent directly to you with no shipping cost. The process is simple, 100% online, and there are no uncomfortable doctor visits. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to your ongoing care. Hims has hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, and they can help you get your confidence back with visibly thicker and fuller hair. Start your online visit today at hims.com/purple insider. That's HIMS.com/purple insider for your personalized hair loss treatment options. hims.com/purple insider. Results vary based on studies of topical and oral minoxidil and finasteride. Prescription products require an online consultation with healthcare provider and will determine if a prescription is appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Well, and it means absolutely nothing to me that they haven't made some grand announcement that he's QB1.
Right.
And I think we all have large enough football brains to figure out who the starting quarterback is. And when you have the veterans talking about, yeah, we can't wait to work with J.J. McCarthy, and he's going to be our guy. We're bringing him along, and we like, and all this stuff. You're like, yeah, there's no competition here. I don't want there to be. I don't want it even to be a fake competition. I would prefer to see J.J. McCarthy get every single first team rep from day one and be the guy, and that will be very obvious that then he is quarterback number one. So the draft. Oh, well, let me just give you a real quick on the injury stuff. He said that he thinks that Mekhi Blackmon is very close to the end of his rehab process, so it sounds like he'll be able to just pick up where he left off. And Christian Darrisaw has, quote, knocked out of the park his rehab. Now, I don't know how many times we've ever heard KOC say someone has been a disaster in their rehab or something like that. But normally if there is an issue, it will be kind of couched with, well, he's coming along and we're not trying to put too much pressure on him or something like that. That was how he talked about Hawkinson. But it sounds like from his comments that Darrisaw is on track, and that's something we'll be watching for, I'm guessing, later in training camp for when Darrisaw is ready to go, but we'll see if he's out there for any OTA or mini camp or anything else like that. And Will Fries is also at the end of his rehab, similar sort of situation. Just doesn't sound like there's going to be too many guys where we're talking a lot about their injury situation outside of Christian Darrisaw. So let's move on to what KOC said about the draft. He said, Matthew Coller is right. I'm convinced. Wide receiver is our guy. Let's freaking go. 3 deep forever. And then he dropped the mic and walked off. That's how I remember it. But maybe you had a different interpretation.
No, I think that was it. No. I think while you have convinced me, I don't know if you've convinced them. I don't know that you haven't convinced them. I don't think they're going to take a receiver in the first round. But hearing him talk about the draft, he referenced the 4 picks. Did you know they only have 4 picks? Yeah, they only have 4 picks. I don't know if it's been talked about enough. But he referenced the 4 picks by immediately referencing free agency. And I think that kind of speaks to kind of where they're at, the headspace they're in entering this draft. You're almost taking the 4 picks and making it okay that you only have those because you spent $300 million and you filled all your weaknesses. He basically said, I feel comfortable with where we're at. I don't think when we're on the clock, whenever we pick, we're going to feel the need to take position X, position Y, position Z. And I think that's kind of where we've all landed through free agency, is they've done such a phenomenal job addressing these weaknesses. I'm not going to say that the draft doesn't matter, because it does. That's where you cultivate talent. That's where you build depth. It's where you find stars at times. Even at number 24, you can find stars at times. But I think deep down it probably does weigh on Kevin O'Connell that they only have 4 picks. But I think he's trying to remind himself, we have a roster that seems to be, at least on paper, locked, loaded, ready to go. And whenever we pick, we're going to add a really good player, potentially a few good players, potentially more than even 4 players. Maybe they trade back and get more picks. But the focus, at least in my interpretation of the draft, was like, we're excited for it, but remember what we did in free agency, because I know a lot of people are going to be talking on Saturday, well, they only got this many players. Well, they also added Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, Javon Hargrave, Jonathan Allen, you name it. Retained Byron Murphy, Aaron Jones, added Jordan Mason. And I think that's kind of where Kevin O'Connell took the draft conversation today. We'll see what he thinks on Thursday and Friday and Saturday when, the Lions, Packers, and Bears and everyone else have added more players than they probably have. But I think it's easy to kind of think about your draft capital and put a positive spin on it when you look at what they've done in free agency as a whole.
But it still sounds more like they're just going to pick where they're at, maybe in the middle of the round. I mean, that's just what it sounds like to me when you hear that. When you hear like, oh, yeah, well, we scouted a lot of players and we're going to see them come off the board, and they could all just be bluffing, and they've got 6 trade downs that they're ready to do. But between what Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said, it really doesn't feel like, yeah, we want to accumulate as many picks as possible. A lot of times teams will toss it out there in the media and say like, yeah, well, we're open for business. Teams should give us a call. We haven't heard anything like that from them. And again, they could just be playing some sort of game with that and not wanting to show their cards and let everybody know that they want to trade down because there could be some sort of competitive disadvantage there. I really don't know. But there was still he said, we don't need to do anything as far as the draft goes because of what they did in free agency. And that's why it makes me think that they have some ideas about who might be there 24 and they might just take them. Again, could be totally wrong on draft night. Depends on who's making the phone calls, trying to get up and things like that. But it does feel like they want a first round draft pick player. And there are some advantages to that, including you get the 5th year option with that guy. And that can be helpful as well, and you're not sacrificing potential talent. And I still, every time I look at it, I think, how does one great player, one great prospect not get there to the Vikings at 24? And because the roster is so full, they may have the thought process of like, let's get one guy who can really be something for us, as opposed to trying to go out and get as many players as possible. And they do projections on this stuff too. I mean, they're going to compare what the potential ceiling of the 24th overall pick could be versus the 35th and number 87 or 94 or 103. I mean, that's another thing is we get caught up a lot of times on, well, you can add an extra third. Can we go through the 3rd round picks for the Vikings? Like you got Alexander Madison, Brian Asamoah, like a lot of times those 3rd round picks. And I was just looking at this. I just did a big article on this at purpleinsider.football where I called a data scientist and a couple of people in the league and then compared it with what Kwesi said. And a lot of what people came back to was, those picks in the middle round, sometimes they become Stephon Diggs, but a lot of times we overrate them based on what they're actually worth versus the value of getting a star. You can get Eric Wilson in free agency to be a backup linebacker for pretty cheap. You cannot get Justin Jefferson outside of the 1st round of the NFL draft, or Christian Darrisaw, or even a Jordan Addison caliber player. So if they see someone like that, then they're going to do it. Now, him saying they don't need anything, if we took that really truly to heart, they have no need, they could just draft whoever the heck they want, who would that be for you? Like, whose name comes to mind when Kwesi says, essentially paraphrased, we might stick and pick, and KOC says we don't really need anything? Who pops into your brain?
Luther Burden pops into my brain. You convinced me. Okay, let's go. We're rewinding the tape back to the owners' meetings in Florida. Me and Coller are sitting down in this beautiful hotel that neither of us will ever be able to afford to actually stay in, or will they ever let us. But we're sitting in the lobby, and Sean McVay probably walked by us, but we were talking, and you said, look at all the receivers that got paid this offseason. And the way you compared, either you're going to pay a ton of money for Cooper Kupp, who might be past it, or you're going to overpay for a guy like, I don't even know what the name you used.
Well, I think I said that DK Metcalf, who's like a number 2 receiver, got almost as much as Justin Jefferson, and the other
Josh
guys,
Palmer was the one. That one sold me.
He got $10 million, and Tutu Atwell got $10 million as well. So I kind of qualified them as they're either old and angry that you could get in trades, or you way overpay for a free agent, and even the wide receiver 3s you have to give significant money to.
That sold me on just draft a receiver. If you truly do not need anything, and you don't need anything, because going back to free agency, you have knocked that out of the park, addressed all your weaknesses, then be the forward-thinking organization that we think you are, and address a need that might come a year or two down the road. Maybe you don't want to pay Jordan Addison his 5th-year option. Maybe you don't want to pay Jalen Naylor $12 million to be your wide receiver 3 next year. Yes, Jalen Naylor is probably going to make in the upwards of over $10 million because he's fast and produced a little bit when Jordan Addison was out last year. All of those things, and I know people have opinions on Luther Burden. Is he a good enough route runner? I don't care. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands, and he fills a need that this team really needs, which is quick passes over the middle, underneath. He can develop his route running. You have Justin Jefferson, you have Jordan Addison. He gives you something else, and that's kind of where I lean with this. Is if Luther Burden is there, and some people think he is, like he appears to be falling. At least according to the draft people, he draft nerds, like you call them, he appears to be falling. Now, he might go 12 on Thursday night, and then those guys were wrong. But if he's there, I think the talent that he possesses, the scarcity at like high-end talent that the receiver position kind of has throughout the league, you're not going to find a guy like that anywhere else but in the first round, whether that's in the middle, the late. They're obviously not picking in the early stages of the first round now, and they hope not anytime in the future. You're not going to find a talent like that anywhere else. So that's where I would go. You fully convinced me on receivers. I'm not just saying this because we do a pod together and you pay me. Like, you have convinced me, and it makes sense. Like, just think about it. I know people are obsessed with defensive tackle, with safety, with corner. All those, there's arguments to be made. But you heard Kevin O'Connell say it. They don't need anything right now. So go get something that in a couple of years you might, and maybe this unlocks something else in this offense. I think Luther Burden would do that, and I think there's other receivers around that time in the draft. If you stick and pick truly at 24, that could offer the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not against the Buka either.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess I hear defensive tackle when I hear that. We don't need anything because you can rotate a defensive tackle. And Kwesi said scarcity multiple times last week. And defensive tackle and wide receiver, to me, are the 2 most scarce positions outside of offensive tackle. It's probably number 1, where if you sign a mediocre offensive tackle, you're paying him a lot of money. That the same thing goes for a defensive tackle, where even someone like Javon Hargrave is 32 and coming off a pretty serious injury, and he still gets $15 million a year. So the same thing applies to that. There are a bevy of good wide receiver prospects who will be available potentially in the 3rd round. I really like Jalen Noel from Iowa State as a potential option there, and I think that the gap between someone like Burden and Noel might not be as big as what we think, but it could be big on the board. So we'll see how that plays out. I mean, you don't have to sell me. Like, that's my argument, and I've been for it. But I tend to kind of whittle it down a little bit. The position I would move away from when you talk about not needing anything, and this will transition us into what we heard from some players, is the safety position, because I think it is a spot where you can find those in free agency. And also, I mean, Harrison Smith is always going to speak well of his teammates. We know that. But I always listen to what levels in which he does that when we ask him questions. Just for example, a couple years ago, I remember asking him about Lewis Seen when they drafted him, and he was like, I think you're overlooking Cam Bynum. And we were like, oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, he's on the team. But we didn't know what he knew, which was how good Cam Bynum is. He didn't just praise Theo Jackson. He said the Titans made a mistake letting him go, and he also said he's big time, in my opinion. I think I'm moving a little bit away in these final days before the draft from the idea of Malachi Starks or Nick Emenware after hearing him talk about Theo Jackson. And if that's the way he's talking about him, then that's the way Durante Jones and Brian Flores are talking about him as well. And he said, he gets in there and he makes plays and all those things. And somebody does not talk that much about somebody else for no reason. If you asked me about somebody I don't really know or care about, I'd be like, yeah, they're doing their job out there. But you asked me about Dane, I'm going to talk for hours, right? So I really think that there's something there with Theo Jackson. We all saw it in training camp. We all saw it in Seattle. We saw it in Philly in 23 when he intercepted a pass, came right in the game. But I get the sense that behind the scenes, Theo Jackson really impresses people. And at that safety position, we know intelligence, work ethic, chemistry, those all are going to supersede pure athleticism, and that might move me away from the possibility that they pick Starks and go to those more scarce positions, which is why defensive tackle keeps coming up. But I was kind of floored by the way that Harrison Smith talked about Theo Jackson today.
Yeah, floored because of how effusive in the praise he was. But then at the same time, like you mentioned, maybe not that floored, because you ask anybody on defense about Theo Jackson, screw it, anybody on the team, it doesn't have to just be defense. You ask an offensive player about Theo Jackson, and they all have the same thing to say. And it's not like all 53 of these guys got together before the last season and said, anytime we're asked about Theo Jackson, just rave about him. No, they're talking about him for a reason, because he consistently makes plays. He consistently makes his presence felt. And Harrison Smith said it, even in just short snapshot moments throughout the game. He was asked to play in a pinch, and he always makes a play. The Seattle game last year, he goes in, he intercepts the ball, ends the game. So when you take what he said and you kind of compare that to, like you talked about, the scarcity of positions, safety is not a scarce position. How did they get Theo Jackson? The Tennessee Titans freaking cut him, and they claimed him off waivers. That is someone you can get later in the draft or on the waiver wire. Cam Bynum was a cornerback, and they drafted him in the 4th round, and he turned into a really good safety that now makes $15 million a year. We're reading the tea leaves here, but that's what you have to do in the lead up to draft. Scarcity of the position that Kwesi adofo-mensah talked about last week, safety doesn't fit that role. Now, maybe they will take Malachi Starks and with the number 24 pick. It'd be a fine pick. But when you listen to what they've said over the last 2 weeks now, when we've now talked to the general manager and the head coach, it does push you probably more towards certain positions and away from others.
And if it is Malachi Starks, it's not like they have to cut Theo Jackson. Right. They find ways to get guys on the field. I just feel like what they've said would move that down for me on the list. I should also mention corner when they say we don't need to draft anyone. They signed Isaiah Rodgers. They brought back a very happy Byron Murphy, who we spoke with today, who said he didn't want to be anywhere else. I think that's what most people say, but I actually think that's very true in his case. And they don't need one, but they could certainly take Jahdae Barron if he drops to them, or whatever other corner they like at 24th overall. And we should mention that position as well as one where you don't have a specific need. Now, going further into what Harrison Smith had to say, right off the bat, obvious place to start the press conference. Why are you back here? And he came out and said that it was an easier decision this year than it was in the past, which just natural process. You would have thought, well, wouldn't it be harder each year to decide to come back? But I think what he was alluding to, and he didn't want to say, I think we can compete for the Super Bowl, because he doesn't want to have some sort of big quote that gets out there. But he really alluded to that he likes being here under this environment, is extremely comfortable with it, really, really appreciates Durante Jones and Brian Flores, of course. But Durante Jones, I think, is more important to him than people maybe understand. Because even when I was interviewing him for a different story last year about Flores, he said, hey, don't forget about Durante Jones, the defensive backs coach, as being like one of the main central figures to this. I think the environment, culture is used all the time, but it matters. Like, do you like showing up to work every day? And I also think that he feels like they can legitimately compete in the playoffs and take another step in the playoffs with this team. And that's why he wanted to come back, aside from, the body feeling good and whatever else. But I would have expected him to say, yeah, this was the hardest yet. And it didn't really feel that way from Harrison Smith.
No, and I think the reason, at least I thought it was going to be a really hard decision, is because he cried in the locker room after the game. And I get it. It was sad the way that the season just kind of ended. You get your doors blown off against the Los Angeles Rams in the first round. Kind of a jarring way to end what was such a special season. So maybe that's where the emotion came from. And Harrison Smith said it. The emotion also came from, this is not going to be the same team. Like, he probably knew deep down Cam Bynum's probably not going to be here next year. But I read that emotion, which now turns out to be incorrectly, read that emotion as, like, he's really confronting the fact that this might be it. It wasn't that. He said, even in the locker room post-game, he kind of alluded to this today in his press conference. In the locker room after the playoff loss, he was pretty sure he was coming back. He just wanted to give enough appreciation and space to kind of reflect on this season and not push forward to his decision about will he retire or will he come back. It was an easy decision for him in a way, he said, but when you kind of zoom out and look at it, it does make sense why it was an easy decision. Think back to 2 years ago when we weren't sure if he was going to come back now for what would have been year 13, and now we know he's coming back for year 14. There was a ton in flux. They didn't have a quarterback. He didn't know who they were going to draft. He didn't know which direction they were going to go. Were they going to re-sign Kirk Cousins, who he had a good relationship with? Were they going to let him walk? What was Kirk Cousins going to do? What was the future of the quarterback position going to look like? Where do the Vikings fit into the grand scheme of the league heading into last season? A lot of people thought the Vikings were going to be one of the worst teams in the league last season. So when you take all of this and then you compare it to the situation he's coming back into now, maybe it does make sense that it was a little bit easier because there is a clear, effective vision. Where are we headed? Are they going to win 14 games this year? Probably not. But there is a vision. You can see it. And this probably goes back to what we talked about earlier in the podcast about his relationship with J.J. McCarthy. He can see that guy being the guy to lead them. So there's a lot more known commodities, or at least there were when he was making this decision, than maybe there were a year ago when it was he's kind of having to squint his eyes and convince himself, like, I think we could be good, but maybe. And, like, do I really want to come back to work if we're going to be fighting it the whole year? I think he loves this game. He has said it a couple of times in his, this time of the year decision-making process that you can't buy a spot out here. I think all of that plays a role into it. Like, if you feel like you can play, you have to play. Because once you decide you can't go back and undo that decision. But it really does feel like it also just comes down to, like, I think we can be really good this year. And I want to see that part of it through. And I tend to agree with him. What is that going to look like in the win-loss column? I don't know. But I think they're going to be a team that is certainly one that is each week going to be a hard team to kind of go up against and play against. And I think that's enough for Harrison Smith as he kind of projects out what this season looks like.
I just think that we have to recognize how rare what we're seeing is here from Harrison Smith. I mean, the NFL does not allow you to decide when you're done. You have to earn that. You have to play really well, which I think he still did last year. And if you look at it, even by, PFF grade, which has been very kind to Harrison Smith and I think told a better story on his career than any traditional statistic ever could, he was still a higher rated safety last year than Javon Holland that got, $20 million a year. And I know some of that is based on Holland's age and previous performance, but it tells you that Harrison Smith is still enough of a playmaker. And I think the communication element, the leadership element is now so valuable at a safety position that having him back feels like a final piece to the defense that they needed to have him come back and not have to try to train somebody all new on that back end or multiple players that are all new on that back end. So it is important, but just when you have somebody who has accomplished what he has accomplished, and I think he really recognizes this. There are some players who are so in the moment that maybe they're not really aware or thinking of stuff like this, but Harrison is a very aware, a very thoughtful person. And I think you could see it even when he's doing this press conference of like, in years past, he might have been thinking, oh, I got to go talk to these media guys again. And I was like, there's not going to be many more times where somebody comes to you calling and says that they want to hear what you have to say. For him, maybe he'll go to broadcasting or do a podcast. Purple Insider will hire Harrison Smith. I think I could pay him very little, right? If he really wants to do it. I mean, he's got money. He's got another multi-million-dollar contract. But the job offer is out there for Harrison to join this podcast. But the point is, I think you can hear it in his tone. And even in our tone, asking questions, we all recognize this is just not something that happens a lot. How many players in a franchise ever have someone play 14 years for one team, do it at this high of a level, many Pro Bowls, All-Pro, a season where he had a chance to be a defensive MVP, and now he gets to lead them in a season where they have extremely high expectations. So I think maybe just for all of us, and all Vikings fans kind of soaking in whatever is left of the career of Harrison Smith. But it's kind of cool to see that transition from him, from guy in his prime who's fighting the fight, whatever, to now he can really reflect in real time while still being an effective player. It's just a pretty cool thing to happen for this team. But speaking of old people, Aaron Jones said whoever invented age, screw them. What do they know? I think it has something to do with the sun, the moon, something like that. Isaac Newton, I don't know. But whoever invented age, Aaron Jones has got a bone to pick with you because I'm sure he's gotten tired of hearing about. I think what he was actually saying is age is just a number, is something that he lives by. And he did last year. He had a very good season. It didn't sound to me like Aaron Jones was saying, yeah, I'm ready to split carries 50-50 with Jordan Mason. But he does like Jordan Mason's playing style and mentioned even getting a chance to be on the field at the same time, which I think is not very likely that that's going to happen. But I like what KOC said about Aaron Jones and what he can do in a more 50-50, 60-40 type of role. Just getting the best version of him for 200 carries or 175 is better than 80% of him for 255 carries, and that's what Jordan Mason does. That was my biggest kind of takeaway from Aaron Jones, though. How about you?
Yeah, I think Aaron Jones is kind of built in a way where he's never going to say, I want off the field. Tap me out. I don't got it. And he set a career high in touches last year. And I think if he was truly being honest with himself, he understands that that is not a sustainable way to continue your career. But he is kind of just driven in a way that that's what he wants to continue to do. He wants to one-up himself. He wants to prove that he still can. But I also think, and this is why what Kevin O'Connell said at the owners' meeting stood out to me, if Aaron Jones were to reflect on his career to this point, he is more effective in a way when he can kind of split carries in a 1A, 1B backfield. He was effective last year, but at times the body wore down. I know he played every game, but I think the culmination of that many touches is something that as you get over 30, and I can speak to it because I'm 33 years old and I stood up at a Kendrick Lamar concert for 2 hours over the weekend and now my lower back is on fire. Like as you progress in your age, because age is just a number and it is something that exists, you need a little more. And I think a guy like Jordan Mason pairs perfectly with him. I thought that when they signed him. I think Aaron Jones will feel that even more next year when he's not taking a beating and setting a career high in touches. But I did get the sense that he is excited about getting to work alongside someone like that in the backfield. I don't think he's ever going to come out and say, like, yeah, I can't wait to cede some carries to the guy next to me. But that's just not how he's built and how he's wired. So that's going to be an effective backfield tandem. I think we can all kind of project that out in a way that, it's very plausible that they're both going to have pretty effective years on the ground. But I just also zooming out, just love talking to Aaron Jones and love anytime he is kind of, whether he's standing in front of a lectern or he's standing at his locker, you want to talk about having an appreciation for a guy like Harrison Smith and what he's done in his career. Like we should have that same appreciation for Aaron Jones and just who he is as a person. I think it can be such a cliche sometimes, like, oh, that guy's a great person. Yeah, everyone thinks everyone's a great person. But Aaron Jones is truly like one of the best people. And I think the fact that he wanted to come back here, that he now will get into year 2 and be probably even a bigger presence in that locker room, it's probably not something you can measure on the field in terms of carries, yardage, touchdowns. But he's going to bring something else now that he has another year under his belt in this system. It was big to get him back. It's big to get someone to run with him. But overall, just like the fact that he was up there today talking, it's a good thing for the Vikings moving forward into the offseason and into next season as well.
There is something that's different about Aaron Jones where you might only meet a couple people in your life ever that are like Aaron Jones, the perfect culmination of a very, very intelligent person who also understands other people really well, is incredibly good at communicating. But I think the biggest thing is that his attitude is unwavering of positive energy. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's around him just picks up on that. No matter what happens, no matter how high or low your team is, Aaron Jones would be somebody that you want back there. And I asked him about being around Jordan Love when he was young, and he talked about what a good experience that was working with him, and I think he's really important for J.J. McCarthy. He'll also catch the football. This is another thing, too. Like, we talk about, and Harrison Smith said that about Aaron Jones, too. He said, like, we talk about what a great person he is, but, like, don't forget, he's a great competitor, and he's a great football player. It's not just, like, we're hugging each other all the time. But I think him being back there catching the football from J.J. McCarthy, a guy who is going to be a little more willing to use his running back and tight end, will be really enormous. I looked up who invented the calendar, by the way, and now this is just AI. Could be right, could be wrong. I don't even know. This says the Gregorian calendar, used by most countries today, was invented by Pope Gregory the 13th in the year 1582. So relatively recent. The dinosaurs were not using calendars. It says he reformed the existing Julian calendar, which was introduced by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. So essentially, Aaron Jones has really a bone to pick with Julius Caesar. That's the guy who's the real problem here, Aaron. It's not us. It's not our narratives about older running backs or age curves or fantasy people. It's Julius Caesar is really the issue. Well, I guess there's a reason somebody went after him.
Yeah, who would win in a fight? Julius Caesar back then or Aaron Jones in present form?
Maybe that was the problem, is that Julius Caesar said to Brutus, hey, man, you're starting to get a little old. And I just can't, right, exactly. I just can't have, anyway, that needs to end right there. And so let's put in real predictions then for draft night for what the Vikings do. And by real, I mean, I don't think either one of us think they're actually picking Luther Burden, but maybe you do. I don't think that they will. Derek Harmon is the guy that I have circled. I think they stick and pick at 24 and take Derek Harmon. What do you think?
This is boring because I think they stick and pick and take Derek Harmon. It makes too much sense.
How about this? Make your prediction if Derek Harmon gets taken before them.
That is, yeah, because at 24, they're certainly not moving up because they don't have the draft capital to do so, but screw those picks. Maybe they will move up. See, that's where it gets hard because I don't think they're going to take a safety. Like, I think if Malachi Starks is screaming at them and he's the only guy and all their other players on their board around that range of pick and they're truly sticking and picking, if Malachi Starks is the only one there, they'll probably take him. But I think there are going to be, and it's just because I've used that draft simulator so many times, shout out PFF, but I think there's going to be talent there, whether it is in the trenches on the offensive side or the defensive side. And assuming Derek Harmon is not there, I am going to assume that Walter Nolan is there, and I'm just going to take him too. Like, I think adding to that position, well, I want them to take a receiver, and you fully convinced me that way. And I actually wrote in the Pioneer Press that they're going to take Luther Burden just because why not? It's Sunday paper. I think a guy like Walter Nolan makes sense there too. Just a penetrating force on the defensive side of the ball that could project to be someone dominant down the road. You don't find defensive tackles really that dominate anywhere else but the draft. You just don't. And I know Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave are going to come in here, and you hope they're going to put pressure on the passer. But both of those guys are only available to you because they are over 30 years old and they are both coming off significant injuries. You don't find top-end talent in the trenches of the defensive line unless you spend a pretty high pick on it. I know Chris Jones was a second-round pick, but even that is an outlier. Like, you got to spend on it in the first round. So if Derek Harmon's not there, I think they just pull the trigger and take Walter Nolan there too. I know he's a guy who can be a little polarizing to certain draft experts out there, but I think if he's there, that's who they should take.
I like it. Okay, thank you very much for your time, Dane Mizutani. And on draft night, I will be live for the entire first round. If they trade back to the second round, then guess what? I'll be live then too. We will see what happens. I'm sure that Dane will be a part of those live streams as well. So thank you so much for all of your time, and we'll catch y'all soon.
Football.
Football.